to Katie.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, I'll just share my screen because I have some slides that I can speak to. And then we'll put that on slideshow. Fabulous. So I'm going to continue talking in the hope that you can see my screen and just shout if you actually cannot for any reason. So first I'll just talk a little bit about Emerald, who Emerald are. So we, as Meredith was saying, we're based in the UK, in Leeds. We were actually founded by academics. So back in 1967, a group of academics at Bradford University's Business School felt kind of like they didn't have an outlet to publish that they wanted to that really fit their kind of values as academics. So they bought a journal and they started their own publishing outlet. And since then we've grown into a publisher that publishes over 300 journals and also around 350 books a year. We are guided by our Real Impact Manifesto, which we launched in 2018. So that is all about a commitment to really being able to publish research that kind of translates to that real impact in the real world. So kind of looking at impact beyond the kind of ivory tower and kind of real societal impact in people's everyday lives. We're ambassadors for SDG focused research. So in 2020, we signed the SDG Publishers Compact. So that's our commitment both to publishing content that aligns to the SDGs, SDGs being Sustainable Development Goals, but also kind of embedding sustainability into how we kind of operate as businesses ourselves. We also were an early signature of DORA standing for the Declaration of Research Assessment. And that is a commitment to identifying new ways of measuring how research is evaluated. So beyond kind of what we would see as traditional metrics, such as citations and impact factors. So looking at things like impact on, kind of dissemination on social media or citations in policy reports. So kind of really like broadening the lens through which we would deem a piece of research to be impactful or to have, reached a kind of broad audience. And then just to expand on that a little bit, so we kind of organize all of our content around that kind of alignment to the Sustainable Development Goals. And within that, we kind of organize around 5 key mission areas. So those are listed on screen. So those are responsible management, quality education for all, healthier lives, fairer society, and sustainable structures and infrastructures. So through these kind of lenses of these kind of missions which reflect sort of key societal challenges, we're able to kind of really showcase the research that we're publishing that kind of responds to these areas and creates a space for a dialogue around how to kind of solve these grand challenges. And that kind of feeds into our, impact values, our commitment to different ways of measuring the impact of research, and our kind of mission-led approach to the content that we bring in. And then next up, just a little bit about me. So Meredith did very well in summing up my role at Emerald. I'm a senior commissioning editor. I've been at Emerald for 6 years now, so starting back in 2018. And in my role as senior editor on the social sciences side of our books programme, I lead a small team of commissioning editors and then commission across the social sciences, so disciplines including sociology, criminology, EDI, policy, politics, gender studies, and more. And kind of specifically in my role as my commissioning role, I commission in sociology and criminology with specific interests that I've listed on screen. I won't just read all of those to you, but those are the kind of areas that I personally am interested in from a commissioning point of view. And then getting onto the kind of main sort of thrust of this presentation is Emerald's Books programme and kind of demystifying a little bit around the books publishing process. So kind of to start that part of the presentation, you might ask, why would I want to publish a book? A big reason would be sort of recognition and credibility. So writing a book is a really good way to kind of really make an impact within your subdiscipline or your field, to really kind of take ownership of a particular kind of area that you have been publishing in, really creating a sense of academic identity kind of in that space. A book is obviously very narrative led, so and kind of linking to the other point on screen around having more space. So really being able to develop a sense of storytelling beyond what an article might be able to give you in terms of that just having more words to be able to kind of have a beginning, middle, and end in terms of showcasing your research, but really kind of putting that within a narrative. Career development might be a reason. So in certain institutions or at certain stages of your career as an academic, writing a book might be really helpful in terms of academic promotion, or kind of being recognised on the job market, and then also audience and dissemination. So often book publishing provides an opportunity to really create a sort of product that can appeal across the subdisciplines, in a way that an article has more of a kind of more nuanced and specific focus, that a book can provide that kind of wider appeal, and is also disseminated globally, so in print and in ebook, and different forms of electronic access. So it really can provides the opportunity for kind of widespread dissemination. And then I just wanted to do a little bit around the kind of different book formats that we publish at Emerald. So I've kind of listed these on screen. I would say the ones that I've listed on screen are kind of what we would say are the kind of majority of the books we publish at Emerald. We do publish also a smaller list of professional business titles, but in the main, the kind of majority of our program would be monographs and short form books. So that would be in our Emerald Point series. So a monograph being 60 to 90,000 words, and a short form book in the Emerald Points format being between 30 and 50,000 words. So particularly the Emerald Points format is a kind of rapid publication option in terms of books. So once the manuscript goes into production, we would see publication within 3 months, rather than 6 months for a long form book. So Emerald Points is a really good opportunity to kind of respond to a very fast moving area. You might be writing about something quite topical, and with that kind of shorter remit in terms of word count is kind of that opportunity to write in a more accessible way. So it's a nice kind of diverse format. We also publish lots of book series which welcome monographs, edited collections, short form books as well. So they can be quite diverse. A series is a good way to find like a community within which your research can sit. And then finally, we also publish handbooks. So handbooks being sort of really comprehensive edited collections, which kind of would be like a go-to reference for a specific subdiscipline. So if I give you an example, we recently published a handbook on the sociology of emotions post-COVID. So with that subdiscipline being quite an emerging field, it was a really good opportunity to kind of provide that go-to resource for scholars in that area. So with handbooks usually being kind of at least usually around 160,000 words plus, so kind of really being that kind of go-to source for kind of chapters that will cover kind of the breadth of that subdiscipline. And then this is just an infographic that covers the entire publishing process for a book, right from the kind of book proposal to publication. I will send Meredith a copy of this infographic after this presentation, because it is quite a handy resource just to have available. So this covers kind of the like holistically the full process. So from submitting your proposal, and I do have quite a few slides on steps 1, 2, and 3 on this infographic, right up to the, well, really right up to step number 5. So I won't go into those too much now, because we'll have some more slides on those coming up. But I will, as I say, we'll share this kind of after the session, and then it's a nice kind of go-to resource to kind of refer back to. So as that previous slide showed, the kind of first step in terms of submitting a book to us for consideration is completing a book proposal form. So this is just a little rundown of kind of what we would expect to see on that proposal form. And I can absolutely send a copy of that proposal form to Mary as well to share. It's kind of really useful for kind of understanding what detail and information you need to provide in terms of us being able to consider a new book project. So there's very obvious things, so details about yourself as the author or as an editor, so your name, your affiliation, a biography, your contact details, and your publication history, specifically in terms of your previous book publications, is what we would really be interested in from the publisher's point of view. Details about the book, so a potential or provisional title, title being a kind of really great at a glance way of kind of understanding what the core kind of scope and values of the book are kind of immediately. And then also a short and main description. So the short description being usually kind of no more than 100 to 200 words, and the main description being usually around up to 500 words. The idea being that the short description again gives us that really quick lens into the project, and then the main description kind of providing much more detail and kind of fleshing that out much more. We also then like to see a kind of overall description of the topic or the subject area. So, kind of thinking about your book in relation to a subdiscipline, kind of how it's fitting in with kind of conversations that are going on in your area, and kind of, potentially making a contribution or showcasing a new approach. And then we'd also ask for USPs, so unique selling points. So usually that would be something like a key feature. So for example, if you'd undertaken ethnographic research for a certain period, or you'd collected interviews with X number of participants, it's kind of things like that you'd want to kind of bring out in the book proposal and comment on kind of why that's something that would be appealing to a potential reader. We'd also want to see a table of contents in the proposal form, so really getting an understanding of the full chapter structure, and we would want to see chapter abstracts as well, so we kind of really understand the contribution of each chapter and then how it kind of fits into that overall kind of narrative structure as well. We'd also want to get a sense of market and competition, so in your view, who would the book appeal to? Kind of, what stages of academic career would those people be? Are there any particular subdisciplines that would be interested in the book? Is there a potential interdisciplinary appeal? And are there any competing titles? I think a mistake people often make would be not putting any competing titles in a proposal form, but often there is at least relating titles, which is an opportunity for you to kind of acknowledge those, but then comment on how your proposed book project is, making a new contribution, or, taking a new approach that, is that kind of compelling kind of reason to read the book. We'd also ask for information about formatting length, so your proposed word count, if you're going to use any tables and figures, if you have any sample material available. So that's for us thinking, how we're going to position the book based on kind of its length, but also, for example, if you did have sample material available, then that's something that we can share alongside the proposal for like the peer review process. So it's kind of that information capture at the kind of early stage of considering the book. We'd also ask for sales and marketing related information. So we really just want to understand any ways in which you as the author might be able to support the kind of promotion and dissemination of the book. So, any particular networks that you are involved in, the way you could share the publication of the book. And is there anything, say you had like speaking events that were coming up, us being aware of that is really helpful to kind of support any opportunities to promote the book, in the kind of networks that you are already kind of working in. And then we also do ask for reviewer recommendations. So, and I will touch on the review process further in the presentation. But we will kind of consult our own kind of pool of reviewers, and potentially do our own desk research around who is kind of best equipped to review. But we also do welcome recommendations from you as the author, especially if it's a very particularly kind of niche subject area, because we obviously want to make sure we're asking the right experts to review the proposal. And then this is just a list of kind of things that the commissioning editor at a publisher is looking for in terms of the book proposal. So a lot of this kind of speaks to some of the things I was talking about in terms of Emerald's kind of ethos. So kind of looking for research that feels really impactful. So thinking about that kind of SDG framework that often is a kind of growing kind of driver of the commissioning of new projects is, is it responding to a particular SDG or a particular societal challenge, and is it looking at, how the work that can be done to kind of to make waves in that area. So really issues that are facing society or industry or policy. And it doesn't mean that every book has to have that kind of clear kind of impactful link to society, but where that is the case, it's really important to kind of bring that through in the proposal form. We're really looking for a kind of a sense of a fresh approach or a new approach. So really what, in terms of, looking at the literature that already exists, what is really going to be that compelling reason that somebody who's going to pick this book up, as opposed to another book, or, kind of in the context of the literature that's already available. For edited works, so edited collections that are bringing together, lots of different chapter authors, kind of under a thematic, particular thematic strand. We do want to see a diverse range of authors, so particularly kind of geographically, we want to see kind of that sense of international coverage, bearing in mind particularly that, kind of the appeal of having an international audience in terms of readership, that kind of mix of authors in the chapter contributions is really important. And then in terms of that kind of subject area question that I talked about in the book proposal form, if your book is really contributing to kind of a kind of new turn in a subdiscipline, or kind of growing an emerging subdiscipline, it's a really kind of important to bring that through in a book proposal, and especially if you're, for example, as is mentioned on this slide, looking at proposing a new book series, that is really essential in terms of how is the content in this series going to contribute to a particular field or a particular set of researchers. And then these are some more kind of practical tips around putting the proposal together. So then some of these feel quite obvious, so reading the form carefully. But because a lot of the forms do, if you were to ask for a proposal from lots of different publishers, that the information that we're asking for is often quite similar, but that's for a reason, because this is the information that us as the publisher, but also peer reviewers want to know in terms of being able to adequately assess the proposal. So if some of that information is missing, or if it's not kind of fleshed out or detailed enough, you're kind of missing that opportunity for us as the publisher, but also peer reviewers to be able to fully kind of appreciate the the value that the proposed book would be adding to the literature. Detail is so important. So immediately if I'm seeing a book proposal that just doesn't have, the level of detail we would see, so very short answers, it feels like the kind of ideas isn't fully formed yet. In terms of, as the publisher, we would take that initial look at a book proposal form, and we would kind of be evaluating it from what we need, but we would also be thinking that the next step would be a peer review process. And if it doesn't feel like the proposal form is rigorous enough, you kind of know that it's not going to kind of do what it needs in terms of the peer review process. So it's always better to write too much rather than too little. And then connecting your work to the field is really important. So you really want to make sure that coming across in the proposal is how your work is connected to a wider field, is in conversation with existing literature, is kind of aware of other literature that has been published, and is kind of, is not existing kind of in isolation from that. And seeing that kind of you're able to situate your research kind of within that wider field is really compelling for us as publishers, and also for peer reviewers to kind of really see that the author is sort of in touch with kind of, fast moving kind of developments within the field. And then this is just a little slide on how to write the description for section of the book proposal form. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a short and a long description in the proposal form. So in the short summary, we want a really kind of clear and concise, almost like an elevator pitch, really, kind of a really, at a glance opportunity for a non-subject expert, so particularly publishers, to be able to really kind of grasp and get to the heart of what the book aims to do. And the key part of that is avoiding jargon. And then in terms of the long description and the kind of chapter summaries, we really want as much detail as possible. So, as I was kind of saying, the kind of editor at the publisher needs to understand what the book will do, but peer reviewers really do as well. So they kind of, if you're not providing that by not having enough detail in the proposal, then you're kind of setting it up to fail in terms of getting that really meaningful peer review feedback. And then I think a sense of purpose is really important. So what is your research doing, but how does it kind of really make an impact within the literature and beyond? How does it kind of develop current understanding of a particular topic or particular pressing issue? And then in terms of market and competition, so this first bullet point about being realistic is really important. So often in proposal forms, there'll be like a checkbox of different audiences that the book might appeal to. And far too often, authors will tick every single box, which isn't a realistic expectation. And it kind of robs you of that opportunity to be quite specific about who that audience might be, because there will be a more defined audience, and teasing that out. In terms of academic publishing, we're going to be looking at kind of postgraduate students and researchers, and we want to know particularly which subdisciplines might be interested in this book. you're not going to see a book that appeals to a research audience as well as practitioners, as well as policymakers, as well as a general audience. So that sense of realism is really important for us when we're kind of looking at a proposal form when it comes in. And then, as I said, I did refer earlier to the kind of competing title section. It's never a good sign when that is blank, because there might not be a book that directly competes in terms of a really particular kind of nuanced approach to a particular issue, but there will certainly be related titles. And being able to kind of respond to those and comment on how your book is making a sort of really distinct contribution is really compelling, for the publisher to see in the book proposal form, but also for peer reviewers to see. And it kind of it goes back to what I was saying earlier about kind of really situating yourself within the kind of existing literature. And yes, saying that there's no competition for your book is just never very helpful. So, and is unlikely to be the case. So that's a really important one to bear in mind. And then, yeah, this is just a quick side on titles. So I think often it can be quite challenging trying to, identify what the title should be for a book project. So these are some things that I usually think about in terms of if I'm providing any feedback on a proposal. So things like being really clear and concise. So you don't want your book title to read like an article title. You want it to kind of be a little bit more pithy and really reflecting the content, but in as concise a way as possible. You want to have that sense of differentiation. So if I try and pull out an example, maybe you've got a book that's about education and sustainable development. That on its own as a title is obviously very broad, and if you was to put that into a search engine, you'd probably get lots of results. But is there a particular nuanced kind of element of that you can kind of tease out that really does provide that sense of, distinctiveness within the market? So that's something you really want to think about in terms of when you're thinking about competing titles. What is that clear kind of unique thing that you can bring out into the title? You want to think about keywords. So is there a particular phrase or a set of keywords that, if you think about people typing into a search engine, that then might kind of bring your book back as a result. So that's a really kind of important thing to think about in terms of making your book discoverable. And these are all things that, a commissioning editor and a publisher will provide feedback on. And, in terms of the proposal process, any proposal that, comes on my desk as commissioning editor, I will always be providing that kind of first round of feedback before we even kind of consider getting to a peer review stage. So these are all really great things to bear in mind, but also your editor at a publisher is also, there to help you kind of carve out that positioning and that kind of market relevance for your book project. And then just move on to the next slide. Yeah, so I just have a slide here about the benefits of co-authorship. I think this is a really important one in terms of particularly maybe thinking about a first book project or maybe an interdisciplinary project, is that benefit of collaboration, of learning from peers. So potentially if you're collaborating with somebody who has published a book before or is a little bit more senior in their career, you've got that opportunity to kind of work with them in terms of bringing the book together. I think particularly in terms of an edited collection, often, it is a lot of work in terms of communications with chapter contributors and kind of keeping everyone to the same timeline and conversations around structure and bringing that kind of coherent narrative together. So I think working with somebody else in terms of doing that work is really helpful and something that should be considered, and is likely to bring in, stronger and more quality submissions by nature of the kind of editorial networks that are available from a 2 or 3 person editor team. Potentially improve funding opportunities as well. So obviously the kind of wider the network is on the kind of editorial team. If you're thinking, for example, about publishing open access, which I do have a slide on a bit later on, then obviously funding is really key to that conversation. Then I have just put a little note here to say that the kind of flip side of that is making sure that the book is kind of very coherent and doesn't feel disjointed. So that's where you want to really be kind of checking and editing your work to make sure that kind of tone of voice and that authorial voice remains consistent throughout the book. And then this is the list of do's and don'ts. I'm just going to click through so everything comes on the screen. So in terms of do's, so this kind of summarizes what I've already said, but you do want to summarize and conclude. You want to make sure your main argument is coming through throughout the proposal, and you're presenting kind of conclusions and recommendations. So I think both in terms of the chapter structure and the main description, you want to see that kind of by the end of those, you'll have a really tangible conclusion, and you're kind of a kind of solutions focused kind of roundup at the end of the book is always really compelling in terms of, okay, maybe we've identified these problems, but how do we fix it? You want to think about practice. So I think, thinking back to the kind of impacts detail that I was talking about earlier, really thinking about that kind of real world application of your research is really important, particularly for a book in book form. You want to be talking about implications for further research, but also acknowledging any limitations to your own research. And really coming back to what your original main argument or research questions were, and making sure that's kind of all tied up. So that really sense of coherency is really important. So I think a big one here is like introducing some new material like halfway through the proposal that hasn't been mentioned yet and kind of is disrupting and hasn't been reflected throughout. I think that can be quite confusing both for the publisher and for any peer reviewers. So it's kind of really important to make sure that, so for example, with an edited collection, you don't want just a kind of disparate set of chapters that don't really speak to each other or seem to have like a common goal or thematic kind of grouping. So kind of making sure that the kind of overall narrative remains clear and kind of drives each chapter is really important. You don't want to make obvious statements, so maybe any kind of like really kind of throwaway sentences that kind of just don't really need to be there and feel like a bit fluffy or like you're just kind of including words, but it doesn't really kind of contribute to what you should be talking about, which is the what the book delivers and how it kind of makes a difference in terms of the literature or is making a kind of new contribution. And you also don't want to make contradictory statements. So it's kind of linked to the first point, but I think the general kind of advice here is that sense of coherency and purpose that should flow throughout the proposal. And then just to go through the proposal peer review process. So this is very common kind of throughout different publishers, but at Emerald, we have a single blind peer review process. So that means that the reviewer would know the identity of the author, but the author wouldn't know the identity of the reviewer. And as I've mentioned earlier, we do take reviewer suggestions, but we do also draw in our own list of contacts. And usually from, kind of receipt of the proposal and kind of subject to any back and forth with the publishing editor, once we've agreed to send the proposal out for review, we'd usually aim to have reviewer feedback back within 4 to 6 weeks. Obviously, it depends on timelines for assigning reviewer and kind of reviewer availability and schedule, but that's kind of, as a general rule, what we'd expect in terms of timeline for returning the review. And then this is just the slide in terms of what we actually ask reviewers to comment on. So in terms of how that works, we ask reviewers to fill in a questionnaire, and that is a series of questions, and then they will also give an overall recommendation at the end that provides a recommendation from strongly recommends publication through to revise and resubmit the proposal. But just to go through some of these questions, so we're kind of teasing out what their assessment of what the book is and what the book does from the proposal. So I think really we're trying to kind of sense, you know, if the kind of the purpose and kind of real contribution that in the author's eyes the book makes, whether that kind of resonates with reviewers as well. So we asked them to write a short synopsis, kind of summarize the main ideas that the proposal is, in their view, talking about. We asked them what is original about that, what is groundbreaking or thought-provoking, and particularly what the kind of research content of the proposal is. And kind of related to that, how does it contribute to the field? So is there a real sense of, you know, kind of newness, I guess, in terms of, sorry, I'm just resharing my screen because it went blank. Sorry about this. I'll just go back to where I was. Here we go. We're back. So yeah, what that kind of new contribution is, and whether that coverage feels comprehensive. So particularly, is there anything missing? That's usually really helpful for kind of drawing out things that the author genuinely just might not have considered, and actually can be usually a really kind of nice iterative kind of element to the review process, in really kind of allowing the author to go into writing kind of with all that kind of ideas available to them that they might not have considered. And it doesn't mean that they might necessarily take on that view. They might have a reason why actually they're kind of avoided that particular area that the reviewer has mentioned, and there might be a reason for that, and that's something maybe they can address in an introduction. But it's really kind of, you know, making sure that we're kind of we're addressing all of those potential areas, and kind of what makes the peer review process really helpful in terms of developing an idea. We asked for strengths and weaknesses. So again, we're kind of really teasing out what really makes the proposal great, and, you know, equally how it could be developed. We asked about the structure. So does it make sense to an external point of view? Does the narrative kind of develop in the way that the reviewer would expect? Would they change anything about the structure? And we asked that in particular in relation to edited works, that the kind of, you know, the chapters are structured in a meaningful way, and it feels like it's a coherent collection. And then we ask a kind of general question around any additional thoughts or recommendations. And that's kind of a really catch-all for anything else that the reviewer hasn't had opportunity to kind of comment on within the kind of other questions that we ask. So it kind of just gives an opportunity for kind of anything that they would want to say to be covered. And then in terms of next steps, upon receipt of reviews, the editor at the publisher will of course read them. They will then share them with the author or editor of the proposal, and we'll have a conversation around the nature of that peer review feedback. So, you know, you might get too strongly recommends to publish, which will then mean, you know, we might be having a conversation about any particular development points that came from review, but we're really kind of at a point where we can then, you know, send out an offer to publish. Or we might be having a chat about how we can develop the proposal, how the proposal might need to be kind of submitted again after revisions, maybe for a potential future review. So kind of the next steps would be subject to kind of the nature of that review feedback. But really we're kind of certainly from, you know, kind of how I work as an editor, is kind of making sure that you know, what the peer review process has been kind of really helpful, and is allowing us to move towards the point where we can send out contracts offer for publication. But that's kind of, you know, where the editor steps in to kind of create that process, and kind of advise in terms of what we need to do in response to the reviewer feedback. And then I just wanted to cover open access. So In terms of the way we do open access on the books program at Emerald, so this is specific to Emerald. I will say a lot of publishers have quite similar offers in terms of the way that they manage open access programs, but this I'm talking quite specifically to Emerald here. Open access meaning that the ebook or any electronic versions of the book would be completely freely available and accessible to all. And then we still publish a print version, but cheaper and in paperback. So it's still kind of relatively accessible. And we're just really covering like printing and distribution costs with the kind of lower price. So we do publish green open access, which is we have like a really liberal policy for green OA at Emerald. So there's no cost to green open access publishing. It just means that the what we call the author accepted manuscript. So that would be the Word version of the manuscript you would submit for publication. You can make available in several places. More information on that is available on our author rights page, which I can send over. And that kind of details which versions of the manuscript can be shared and where. But it is a quite liberal policy in comparison to some of our kind of peers. And then in terms of fully gold open access, meaning that the final, proofread, typeset, kind of camera ready book is freely available to all online, is what we would call a books processing charge model. So that means that the content is fully in front of the paywall, and there is a processing charge which applies to kind of for each book format. So I can also share an infographic with Meredith around books away publishing, but that will indicate the processing charges per book format. So for example, a short form book is slightly cheaper because it's shorter, whereas a handbook, which is much more long form, is slightly more expensive. So there is that single book processing charge which would apply. And we also do open access at chapter level as well. So you might not have funding for publishing the full book open access, but maybe a slightly smaller amount of funding for publishing just one of the chapters open access. So that is also available, an option that is available. And I will, as I say, I will send around the infographic I mentioned, which kind of details that. And there's also all fully information online on our website as well. And then finally, so well, I say finally, we're nearing the end. One really important thing is to think about selecting the right publisher. So in terms of you'd be thinking about in terms of your particular subdiscipline, who are you aware of that you're seeing, in terms of books you're reading, who is publishing those, who is kind of a recognizable publisher in your specific field. Because obviously, certain publishers are very discipline specific. Emerald, particularly is, very embedded in the social sciences and has a very strong business management economics program, as well as some of the social sciences disciplines I referred to earlier. Are you familiar with any commissioning editors? Or do you have any colleagues that could recommend a particular editor? I think a really important thing in terms of picking a publisher is the individual you'd be working with. So the particular commissioning editor, that you kind of build a relationship with and are able to go to for any questions that you might have. And I think establishing that early on in the process is really good. So you're kind of thinking about who is the right publisher from a sort of from the publisher standpoint, but also on an individual level as well. And then I just wanted to link to a couple of resources. So I have put a QR code on this slide on the screen, but I can also send the links around. But there's just some videos that we have that are on how to write a book proposal, and also how to convert your PhD thesis into a book. So they're just really useful resources that are available constantly. So they can, you can go to those at your however, as you need. And that was my final slide. So we do have a couple of minutes left for questions. But if there aren't any questions, then thank you very much to everyone for listening. And as I say, I'll follow up with Meredith with some of the resources that I mentioned. But yeah, we'll probably have a nice awkward pause for questions, maybe.
I do want to go ahead and say thank you. This
Oh,
was
thank you. No, you're welcome. I'm glad we made it.
Yeah, me too. This has been incredibly thorough. And just to reiterate, availability of this information, I will provide the recording and any materials that Katie, you can okay for me to provide. I'll put it on a LibGuide.
Amazing, thank you. Well, I'll send you an email. Like I can do that straight away, and I'll just attach everything that I've mentioned, and then yeah, feel free to share, wherever you would like. And yeah, very happy that the recording will be available, especially for anyone who came on Monday and wasn't able to make the new time. So I'm glad they have the recording to refer to.
Absolutely.
And if anyone doesn't have any questions now, but maybe so my email's on screen, I'm very happy to take any questions offline if anybody does think of something. Then absolutely do get in touch.
I'll give everybody about 1 more minute.
Mm.
Make sure they don't have questions.
You can see some thank yous, which is very nice.
Oh, we have somebody joining. All right, I am going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again to everyone that was able to shift their schedule around and make it to today's presentation. And thank you, Katie, so much for your time and your expertise and just pulling this presentation together for us.
You're very welcome.
And again, the recording of this workshop will be made available along with any of the materials that Katie is able to provide to me. And that is in a LibGuide located in the library. It's listed under research workshops. But all right. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.